Welcome. You are now linked to your telecom retirement.
Hey, how we doing today? Y- You know, I think all of us have that friend on Facebook. I have three of them. Um, I guess they're conspiracy theory nuts a little bit to some extent. I have three friends. They're great guys, um, but whether they're ultra conservative or ultra liberal, they come up with these posts. They never make a comment. That's the funny part. Is I have this one friend Russ, and I'll check Facebook while I'm watching TV at night on my phone, and it'll come up with the little bell. We'll have the number above it of these are important things that you should know, and I'll click. And Russ has shared 9 pages today. Oh gosh, Russ has shared 9 pages. I hope they don't show up on my feed because I don't want to read them. And it's crazy. If the person's ultra conservative, it's somehow that Biden is part of the Illuminati and he's a stooge for the Illuminati to take over the world and lock you in a cage. If they're liberal, and I have both sides, it's that Trump wants to get elected so he can be dictator for life. And that's his ultimate goal. And everybody's just going to let him do it. But they're crazy. And the ones I love because of the industry I'm in are the ones related to the Federal Reserve. And I don't see them often, but boy, the people that spout them are really convinced that they do happen, that this is a conspiracy. They have no idea what they're talking about, but it's definitely a conspiracy. Some of the ones is it's a shadow company, again run by the Illuminati or the lizard people or something like that, designed to take over the world. And I keep wondering, if they're already controlling everything, isn't that already controlling the world? Why do they need to control more of it? But that's they don't people don't answer that question. Is I saw a video recently that talked about how the Federal Reserve was set up so that these bankers who are they're business people that just want to scam the world, that they can get protected from going out of business and save all of their money on the backs of the taxpayers. Yeah, I don't think so. Or the banks themselves own the Federal Reserve and they're controlling the whole thing. And that's just not the case either. So I kind of wanted to go over the Fed a little bit because there's a lot of mysteries and there's something specific that they do. And we've been really focused on them lately that I want to talk about uh, in a lot of detail about what my opinion of what's going on and possibly how we can use this in our own personal lives to make better financial decisions moving forward. So let's roll the clock back to 1913. 1913 is when the Congress passes the Federal Reserve Act to create the Federal Reserve. Again, one of these videos I was watching was talking about um, it was some backdoor deal that the bankers got together to strong arm Congress in it. They didn't. They didn't. There was a massive bank run and economic depression type of economy back in I think 1907, and it took 6 years for them to come up with a good plan to create a Federal Reserve, a national bank. The United Kingdom has had one for hundreds of years, and it was kind of time to do it. And you say, well, what are they there for? And obviously, the big thing we're going to talk about today is setting interest rates, and that's what we think about, but that's not why they were set up originally. That wasn't, let me put it this way, that wasn't the main reason. So, a couple of reasons is roll yourself back to the 19 teens, the 1920s, 1930s. Ignore all the technology we have today. Let's say you're a manufacturer and here in Massachusetts, where I am, and you need some sort of raw materials from San Diego, California, and you contact via telegram, I guess, at the time, maybe telephone, but telephone's probably really expensive. And you need to order X number of dollars worth of this. And they want payment because you're in Massachusetts and they're in San Diego and they got to put it on a train and get it across the country and all of that. So you write them a check and you send them a check. How, how do they know that check is legitimate or that bank is legitimate? Is there's a lot of things we take for granted today that the Federal Reserve System created, was to make sure that if you were writing a check in Boston, that it could be cashed in San Diego, and short of bouncing the check and having no money in the account, they knew the check was legitimate. Today we use, well, today I say today, probably for the last 50 something years, we use there's those series of numbers at the bottom of your check. If you've never looked at your check, some of you may not have checkbooks. Younger people I know don't have checks. I love checks. Look at the bottom of the check, and there's a series of numbers, and they're in a strange type. The font is weird, and the reason for that font is that ink is magnetic, and that font is the numbers with like little rectangles attached to them. And what that does is it allows a magnetic reader to be able to read the numbers very quickly, as they know a 6 from an 8, from a 7, from a 2, because of where that rectangle is located in the area. So those first 9 numbers, there's a 9-digit code altogether at the very start of it. That's your bank code. That's your Federal Reserve bank code. And every bank is different. Sometimes they'll have multiple codes per bank, depending on if there was a merger, or sometimes for incoming deposits, they'll use one, or for commercial accounts they'll use one, and for personal accounts they'll use a different one. But those 9 numbers identify you as part of the Federal Reserve System. In addition, most banks today will have, if you look on the upper, let me think about this, the upper right hand corner of your check, there'll be a series of numbers in very small print. It'll be usually like 1 or 2 numbers dash 3 numbers over 3 numbers. It's not a fraction. They're not trying to have you do a math test to be able to cash the check. That's an old system of identifying which bank it is. And all of those things mean something. Like my bank here in Fall River, Massachusetts says 211. I used to know Bank of Boston doesn't exist anymore. Bank of Boston had, I think, the lowest Federal Reserve number. It was 001, 001, something, 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 because they, is each, the Federal Reserve System broke up the country into 12 banking regions. And Boston area is one region, New York, San Francisco, LA, I think, Denver is one, Chicago is one. There's 12 different regions, and each region has their own code. So that's the first thing the Federal Reserve does, is it makes sure that we can uh, execute commerce across the country. That accelerates the economy. It makes the economy grow faster, which is good for everybody. More people get jobs, more people to spend money, which creates even more jobs. That's fantastic. The second thing they do is they stand as lender of last resort. And that's where the conspiracy theorists kind of get in, is they say, well, they'll bail them out. You're looking at it wrong. Is, again, think about it's 1910 and you're a bank, and you take all these deposits in and you lend the money out. Think of it this way: is one of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life. I love that movie. I will watch at least a portion of that movie every year at Christmas time. The beginning of it, it's a long movie. It's a disastrously long movie, but it's a great movie. It's one of those things that just captures my heart. The part I hate about it is that it's probably 10 minutes to 15 minutes long between when Uncle Billy accidentally gives old man Potter the money until George gets to the bridge. Is just heartbreaking, because you look and you say, you can kind of throughout the movie realize that Potter, who is played by Lionel Barrymore, great Shakespearean actor, yeah, he's just a tough businessman. No, he's a thieving scumbag. You all of a sudden realize he's a thieving scumbag. He steals the Bailey Building and Loan Deposit in order to put them out of business. He just steals it. Yup, and steals it. The guy should be arrested. Is Harry Bailey, the kid brother pilot, should drop a bomb on his house. It was that bad. But I digress. In the movie, on the day of George's wedding, there's a run on the bank. It's the 1930s. And there's, it's probably 1929, 1930. They don't talk about the time. And this is during the Federal Reserve System. And the bank closes. The feds close the bank. Actually, they said the state closed it, but it's really the feds that are doing that. Is they said, look, we're going to close. We're going to open on Tuesday, and we'll stand behind everything. And everybody is panicking. So they go racing to the building and loan, because that's still open, because it's not under that same type of control. We need our money. And what does George say? George says, well, your money's not here. Your money's in Fred's house, and it's over on Mary's house. And that's the agreement. And they said, we want our money now. Well, you sign this form and I'll get it to you in 60 days. And they're going bonkers, and they want to have a run. And Mary saves the day by having the money there and all of that. But that's really what happened prior to 1913 is if you got overextended as a bank, there were no regulations at all. There was nothing stopping you from making bad loans. And the Federal Reserve System, plus other laws that were passed in the early 30s, uh, kind of corralled that in. There was nothing stopping you from just making potentially bad loans, and you may not know it. It may just be you're a lender in the Midwest and there's a massive drought and all of your customers are farmers and they can't pay because um, their crop, they're not making as, they're not bringing in as many crops and they can't pay, and now you go under and all of these deposits are lost. And the Federal Reserve System was designed to stop that, was to say, look, let's take some money and back that bank and make sure that they're not going to go under. And then again, in the 30s, a lot more stringent regulations of how much money they have to keep on deposit, what type of loans they can offer, things of that nature were created. So that's the that's the main reason, if you go back to 1913, why the Federal Reserve System was created. Now, they also do something else called monetary policy, uh, which sounds ridiculously boring, and for the most part, it is. Monetary policy is controlling the economy through the movement of money. Okay, that makes sense. So that's versus fiscal policy, which is, Congress is in control of fiscal policy, which is changing laws for those things. But monetary policy is controlling the flow of money, and the Fed has two real ways of controlling that. The first way is something called reserve requirements. Is that the Federal Reserve says the bank has to hold X number of dollars in deposits at the Federal Reserve at any given time as a percentage of the deposits they have on hold at their bank. And if the Federal Reserve feels that the economy is moving too quickly, they can increase that reserve requirement and take some money out of the bank, put it in the Federal Reserve, and that'll slow down the ability for the bank to lend the money out and things of that nature. Interest rates will probably go up a little bit, but it will slow the economy down and cool things off. Likewise, if they're worried about uh, things aren't moving fast enough, if they're worried about a possible recession, they'll lower the reserve requirement and push more money back at the banks to push more money back out into our communities. And that's a great deal. What I find interesting is back in 2020, during the pandemic, the Fed dropped the reserve requirement to zero. And it's effectively been there since then. Uh, if they're so worried about inflation and have raised interest rates over the last 2 years to what's considered astronomical levels versus where they were, why haven't they raised the reserve requirement? Why haven't they slowed the economy down doing using that? We'll get to that. That's one of those ones that I kind of scratch my head about. That doesn't quite make sense. They're not always making sound historical decisions. They're kind of, but we'll get to that. The second way, and probably the most important, and this is the one you think of when you think of the Fed, way that they can control the economy is through setting of interest rates. Monetary policy is if they increase interest rates, less people will borrow money. If they decrease interest rates, more people will borrow money, and just individuals and families buying a new pool or a new car, or a business looking to expand or hire more people, is they can really control that. And that's done through something called the Federal Open Market Committee, FOMC. You'll see that occasionally. You'll see that if you read a blurb on your phone or on the PC, you'll see FOMC, Federal Open Market Committee, and that is consisting of the Federal Reserve Chairman, who Jerome Powell is our current chairman, the 8 governors, and then a select number on a rotating basis of the different regional bank presidents. Remember, Boston, New York, San Francisco, Denver, Chicago, St. Louis, and Kansas City. Missouri has 2. It's the only state that has 2. And allegedly it was because they needed some senators' vote and he wanted 2. He said, split it right down the middle of my state and I get 2 Federal Reserve banks. But I digress. And they set the interest rates for the short-term interest rates. And this is where we start getting into some murkiness. And I want to go back on history. Is the first chairman of the Federal Reserve, Charles Hamlin. He was a politician. He was a lawyer. This is 1913. He's appointed. Um, I can I can definitely get behind that. Is you've got to create this whole system, and having somebody who's a lawyer that knows the system and understands it and can read the law and create this enterprise. It's important to have. He steps down. 9 of the next 10 Fed chairs till 1977 were captains of industry. They were bankers. They were industrialists, things of that nature, because that was the role that was to be played at that point. In 1979. I thought it was 77. Got my notes here today because there's so many different little foibles. Um, in 79, Jimmy Carter appoints Paul Volcker, who is he's not an industrialist, he's not a banker, he's an economist, but the guy's brilliant and he's a leader of men. And that's a big deal. Volcker was brilliant. He's appointed by Carter. He kind of limps Carter out of office economically. Reagan gets in, and between him and Reagan, they basically, it looks at first like they're just going to tank the economy, and they don't. They turn the whole thing around. It was awful. It was ugly. If you remember back then, um, it was utterly terrible in the very early 80s. People were out of work at staggering numbers because they had to beat inflation. And Volcker had a good plan, and he was on until I'm going to say the mid to late 80s. We've had 4 Fed chairs since Volcker. Um, 0 bankers, 0 industrialists. Every single one of them are either economists, which basically they work for a university, or um, they're bureaucrats. They've worked for the government the vast majority of my life, or bouncing back and forth. Jerome Powell has had periods where he's worked for Wall Street, but if you look at it, it's between jobs. It's kind of like he gets this job because of it. It's almost like an influencing peddling thing. Like with a lot of politicians and a lot of people in government, is between jobs. They go to work in industry because they have the connections, but it's not like they're leading things there. So we have these people that are making these decisions that may not be good at that decision making. Let me give you. I got a quote here. This is from uh, the Federal Reserve Act. Is the Fed governors. So the 8 governors um, be a fair representation of the financial, agricultural, industrial, and commercial interests and geographical divisions of the country. Okay, how many of the 8 governors today fit that definition? Take a guess. Would you believe 0? Would you believe 0? It's 0. And that's kind of, to me, that's frightening. Is we've taken an institution that is a banking institution, and we have turned it into another arm of the government, and that can get dangerous. Um, Secondarily, is who we pick as Fed chair is absolutely vital, because the Fed chair really gets their way. And it's not a function of the Federal Reserve. It's not a function of government. It's a function of being a human, is really what it comes down to. Is I was on a church board years ago, and we're changing governance of the church organization. It was a pastor led model. So it was a pastor. There was a deacon board, they called it, and that was just more. They were advisory, but they had no rights whatsoever. There was an associate pastor. He had no rights. It was it was a dictatorship. Whatever the pastor said, went. And it seems logical. Well, this is a man of God. He's making good decisions. We're all human. We all make bad decisions. So we brought in this company that helps churches deal with these issues, and we discovered through a pastor search process, the pastor had left. We were looking for a new pastor. That may not be the best form of government. That having some sort of board would be smart. Is instead of having just a pastor and then these people under him, you'd have a board, and the pastor would be the chairman of the board, but he wouldn't run the board. And I was integral in trying to help set that up. And at the end of it, I kind of walked away because the people there didn't want that. They wanted they wanted the pastor to run the show, and the people that the body picked to be the first board members were people in the church that were never going to question what the pastor said, and they brought in a pastor that was just as dictatorial as some of the previous candidates, and the church suffered greatly because of it. It was sad to watch from the outside, but we as humans look towards the leader and forget that, wait a second, he's not the leader, he's just running the meeting. um, what does Loki say in the Avengers? I know it's a stupid movie reference, but it's part of the, it's probably one of the most truthful things I've ever heard in a movie. He's there in Germany or wherever, and he's telling the people, you crave subjugation, and gosh, he's right. We are looking for somebody to just take the reins. We don't want to have to worry about it ourselves. Same thing here. So within the Federal Reserve Board, you have these 12 people. You think there would be just a vote. Now, is uh, the Fed chairman doesn't not get their way ever, really ever. I mean, they'll table a vote before they vote against him or her, because Janet Yellen was the previous Fed chair. Um, and that's just a function of who we are as humans, and we have to be careful. So it all of a sudden means the person they put in that chair, even if all of the other 8 federal governors um, are bureaucrats, as long as you've got a leader of men, I'll say it that way, is a captain of industry, somebody who knows how to make decisions, you're going to be okay, because they're going to be able to make good decisions. And unfortunately, we're not in that position. We're in a position um, of not having people that know how to make good decisions. And one of the interesting things is the Federal Reserve will set what's called the Fed funds rate. There's other rates that they will set, but the Fed funds rate kind of dictates to some extent what Treasury bills and CDs and savings accounts and short-term interest rates will reflect. They can actually, uh, and we've seen it in the last 10 or 12 years, uh, they can be outvoted by the people. Is the Federal Reserve is not that as powerful as people believe all the time. If investors think interest rates are going down, they're going to push interest rates down, and vice versa, regardless of what the Fed does. Harder to push them down than to push them up, but it does happen. And the Fed has to be mindful of that. One of the other things I thought was interesting was in '77 they passed some additional laws uh, governing the Fed and how it worked. And one of the things that Congress set was a mandate, um, to promote effectively. I'll give you a quote from the bill. The goals of maximum employment, which they're always focused on. If you think about it, the Fed always mentions when they're changing interest rates, hey, we've got a employment's good, employment's bad, and that's why we're making these changes. Stable prices, so that's inflation, and to moderate long-term interest rates. They don't control long-term interest rates. That's a head scratcher. That's been a head scratcher since I was in college in the '80s. To moderate long-term interest rates. You guys control short-term interest rates, right? They're linked, but they're not really linked. It's kind of like your dog is sad, so you reach over and you wag his tail back and forth really fast to make him happy. It's not how it works. He's happy, so he wags his tail. It doesn't go in reverse. Same thing here. And I don't think the Fed really focuses on long-term rates, but they're always looking at short-term rates, and they're trying to figure all of this out. And I don't blame them. It is a hard job. It is a very, very hard job. Uh, you've got to look into the future. Every word, lately especially, every word you say is examined under a microscope, and that's a pain, no question. That being said, no offense to the bureaucrats listening to this, you serve a noble role in the economy. They're horrific decision makers, and here's why: is in government, um, in other large institutions, you can see this inside of a big corporation as well, but definitely in government in general. You have two choices. When you're in charge, you have two choices. There's a difficult decision to be made: do nothing or make a change. If you make the change and you're wrong, it's your fault. It's 100% your fault. And you're going to pay the price for it. You may lose your job for it. If you don't change, well, you didn't inherit this. You inherited this problem. It's not like it's your fault. You can push blame elsewhere and retain your role and keep moving forward. We all make decisions based on not what's best for the world, the economy, the government, my company. We make decisions based on what's best for us. Ultimately, it comes down to us. And if you do that, it makes you a bad decision maker. Paul Volcker, even though he was an economist, he was a great leader of men because he was willing to make a mistake. He was willing to screw up, and he was willing to say when he was wrong. That was what was fascinating. Was if he screwed up, even to this day, he was a senior economic advisor to Barack Obama. This guy crossed uh, political lines. He didn't care. He got along with Carter, who economically was possibly the biggest disaster we've seen in my lifetime. No disrespect to the guy, but he had no idea how to deal with the economy. He was great with Reagan, who was completely different. He was advisor to Obama, who was very, very different from the other two. And I look at that and I say, wow, there was a guy that could make decisions. Not so good today. And you look at that and you say, well, what difference does it make? Well, let's roll back 2 years, 2.5 years. Um, Remember when the Fed said that inflation was transitory and it's not a big deal, and they were wrong? Forget the fact that they were the chief cause of the inflation. The chief cause of the inflation wasn't the pandemic. It wasn't the government pouring money into the economy, although that did contribute to it. The chief cause was that the Fed spent 12 years, 10 years buying treasury bonds and other bonds with phantom money and poured just fake money, just created dollar bills out of thin air to buy these treasury bills to ensure that interest rates stayed low, even though interest rates were already low. There was no reason to do it. They created the entire problem themselves across 3 administrations of the Fed. Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, and Jerome. Maybe Yellen may have stopped it. I had to look that up. But possibly Jerome Powell. They're stuck with these trillions of dollars of bonds that they eventually have to get rid of that could actually contract the economy. There's a big concern of that as well. They caused the problem. They said, it's transitory. It's transitory. Eh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. Turns out it was a huge deal, and everybody but them realized it. You go back to Janet Yellen's time, is she inherited a lot of things from Ben Bernanke of this is the direction we're going in terms of recovering the economy, and she kept emergency measures in place years longer than she should have, solely because, well, it's not broken. I don't want to be the person to stop it and then be wrong. So I'll just keep going. Again, there's that same mentality. Is you all go all the way back to Greenspan, 1999, 1998. If you listen to Greenspan, say 2010 through 2015, and he's getting paid $75,000 to speak at some conference, and he sits there and pounds the podium talking about how he told Wall Street in 98 and 99 that the dot-com bubble was going to burst, that this was unsustainable and they should do something. Okay, you were right, 100%. Let me ask you, did you increase interest rates and slow the economy down? No. Oh, okay. So you didn't do anything. You just said a lot of stuff, and now you're going to hang your hat on that. That doesn't work. So, personally, my opinion today, I think interest rates need to be lower. I won't get into it because I know I've been going for about 30 minutes now. I apologize. This is a topic I think about a lot, but I think interest rates are too high. I think the gap between where inflation is, or where we think it is, and where interest rates are, the gap is too large, and it needs to shrink. Even if inflation doesn't go down anything, if it's at the 3 to 3.5%, interest rates at 5.5% is too high. It's just too high. That being said, I don't think that my opinion is I don't think the Fed's going to lower interest rates until they hit the next brick wall. They hit a brick wall in 2020. They hit another one in 22. They tend to look at the last problem. They fight the last fight because they don't want that to happen again, especially it was on their watch. I will not let that happen. If you listen to Powell's comments, specifically other Fed governors, they continue to talk about the last problem. They don't look at the next problem because they don't want to lose on that field again. We will not lose on that field again. We will not screw up that way again. Well, you need to look forward as well. Your job is a forward-looking job, and that's really important. So, how can you use this? A couple of things to keep in mind as you now understand how all this works. And this probably opened up a lot of understanding of what's going on at the Fed, what's going on, how did it get there, why it's there. You can kind of talk to your conspiracy theory friends and tell them they're just wrong. They won't listen, but maybe you don't bother. I've stopped bothering, but you can always mention that. First of all is know that when the Fed makes a comment or a Fed changes interest rates or doesn't change interest rates, and they change interest rates 8 times a year, they have 8 meetings of this Federal Open Market Committee. That's all short term. That's all short term. You need to look longer term. You need to know that one interest rate change or no change or a comment is not going to make or break. As we've seen, as I record this, and we've seen the last 2 or 3 weeks, market moves of 1% or greater, up or down, based on what the Fed is or isn't doing, which is frightening. There's no reason for that. So focusing on that and saying those aren't going to affect me can make a huge difference in how you deal with your portfolio. Second, know that the Fed always fights the last fight and will always drive it to the next brick wall. I'm waiting for the brick wall. They may miss it. I don't think so. If you know they're going to drive into the brick wall, you can act accordingly. You can make the plans of, I know interest rates are going down. Maybe I'll give you a good, for instance, interest rates are high. They happen to be high now, but let's just say they were high. You may want to lock in those high rates for a longer period of time on the bond side of your portfolio to take advantage of that and not have to have it renew at the lower rates as quick. Likewise, if interest rates are very low and you see, man, they're going to drive into that brick wall, maybe that's the time to lock in debt, things that you're borrowing. If you're refinancing your house, things of that nature, that's a good thing to do before they hit that brick wall and things change dramatically. So that's what I have for you today. I want to wrap up because I know I'm already over what I'd like to have as my time. Be sure and like and subscribe. That's real important for us. If you get a chance, put in a rating, whether you're listening on Apple or Spotify or YouTube or wherever. Throw in a rating. Really appreciate it. Comment as necessary. We check the comments. I do reply to comments. Check out the links in the show notes to get in touch with us. You can get in touch with us, me specifically, on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, our website, a bunch of different ways, carrier pigeon possibly. If you have questions or you need something or have an idea for a podcast or whatever, don't hesitate. Reach out and we will help. Stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to Your Telecom Retirement with your host, Dennis O'Keefe. Please click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available.